Hello, everyone, and welcome. If you're watching this presentation, you probably already know what a master data platform is and how it helps your business. The importance of mastering data is hopefully well discussed at this point. The single source of truth, improved processes through configurable workflows, homogenized syndication, all great cost benefits of a PIM. What isn't well discussed is how difficult and potentially expensive it is to implement a PIM. My name is Michael Desmond. I am a client director at Amplify, and before that I was a project manager for several PIM implementations across different verticals and industries. So I've seen the good, seen the bad, and the ugly when it comes to implementation strategies. And I think the worst thing you can do is underestimate the challenge. A Gartner prediction from a few years ago really struck me. And when I thought about building this presentation, this quote really rang true. And what they said was up to 90% of companies will fail at their first attempt to implement a master data solution, including PIM. So what I want to do is share what I believe are the three main reasons a PIM implementation fails so that you don't fall into the same mistakes I and many others have. So without further ado, I broke this presentation up into sections that correspond with those main reasons. And again, my experience has led me to believe that these three areas are the potential failure points for a PIM implementation. So first thing we'll cover is program management. Then I'll get into data governance. And finally, we'll talk about change management and the strategies behind them all and the different failure points involved with them all. So the first major problem you can run into is also the first step in the process of implementing a PIM. So where PIMs fail before they even start is when you don't properly define business value. So what will this piece of software do that will either save costs or generate revenue for the company? That's the whole point. And this can come in the form of a project charter, a value proposition, but regardless of the form, you need to make sure that you understand what the key business drivers are for the program before you can start mapping out how to accomplish it. So another problem around program management has to do with communication. There needs to be a coordinated team of stakeholders that drive their teams to accomplish their tasks, but also not lose sight of the overarching business goals involved, right? So the specific areas of business that require stakeholder involvement will obviously vary by company and use case, but as an example, I threw together a slide here of some of the common groups. So really quickly, just starting with the technical teams, PIMs by nature interact with other systems. So having experts in the company's integration architecture and best practices is obviously a must, as are SMEs from the source and target systems interacting with PIM. Another required technical role in the implementation is a systems architect. So this is a technical resource that understands the big picture, right? As well as interfaces with the PIM consultants configuring the system. And another role typically from the technical side is the PIM product owner. And this is a very important resource for the implementation, but also for post-go live, because this person has the knowledge of what was built in the system and hopefully the authority to guide decisions about the direction of the PIM moving forward. From the business side, the teams involved will obviously vary, but for this example, I wanted to call out product and marketing teams. Essentially, anyone responsible for product data elements should be involved in the process of the PIM implementation. Focus mostly around the enterprise data model and building out the workflows. So having these people involved is obviously vital because these are the people that will be using the system. And at the end of the day, last thing I'll say about the stakeholder and communication is that the business and the technical teams need to be aligned to ensure that the implementation is delivering on those high-level business goals that we talked about. And that's where the executive level stakeholders come in. So executive level support is needed to greenlight a project of any type, obviously, but it's also key in the implementation and successful implementation. These are the folks that make sure that the project receives the necessary attention across the organization and just really are the, I guess, cheerleaders of the project for the company. So once you have those business objectives clearly defined and you have your teams lined up, it's time to map out the plan. And this is another common mistake area, this phase. And the big mistake is trying to solve all your problems in one shot. I've seen over the years several implementations that built a really fancy Lamborghini type solution that had all these bells and whistles, but ended up as shelfware because it took so long to complete, or never even completed at all. So all that was really needed typically is to be successful was a Camry solution, right? Something that functions, that gets you from A to B, that provides you that MVP. And remember, buy-in is crucial for the people that are actually using the system, those business teams. So any sort of long, drawn-out implementation will obviously risk a loss of interest and ultimately a loss of funding. So here's a very simple example roadmap that includes, like I said, those short digestible phases that add value to the business upon completion of each. These are key, right? So the business can see actual day-to-day value while your product team learns more about what the tool can do. So they enhance their abilities while the business is actually using the system, providing feedback. It's just the most effective way to implement any sort of large enterprise configurable type of software. A few other just small considerations to keep in mind when you're planning out this roadmap. And I know you probably are annoyed by me saying this over and over, but I'll say it till I'm blue in the face. Business goals, business priorities should drive all the decisions, right? The only thing that I guess combats that somewhat is when building out a PIM, the core foundational PIM components should be early focused items, right? So your data model, your MVP process workflows, your MVP type of integrations, those are obviously the things you need to build and lay the foundation of your house before you start building the walls and the roof. Last thing I'll say about road mapping, make sure you know your dependencies. So this includes timing of data migrations, timing of data readiness for those migrations, timing of rollouts of other enterprise projects. You shouldn't be building any system like this in a silo, so make sure you're aware of any internal or external dependencies to the PIM. So that kind of covers program management. The next section here, and the next major area I've seen torpedo many a PIM implementation is data governance. So many implementation failures across types of software can point directly to issues that are totally unrelated to the technology itself. The people and processes behind the technology are often really the root cause of a failed PIM. And this is where data governance comes in. The people that are interacting with the data directly or indirectly need to understand and buy into the importance of quality, right? A culture without that understanding will eventually slip back into old habits, regardless of the presence of any fancy new tool or not, right? You're gonna go for the path of least resistance. The PIM software is there to obviously help enforce process change, but the people involved need to understand it and follow it. Apologies for the ambulance, city living. So data governance is ultimately about limiting risk. So poor quality data can hurt your business in so many ways. At its worst, it affects your customer experience, which leads directly to lost sales, but it also costs you money throughout the life cycle of the product, life cycle of the data behind the product. So a data governance program needs to truly be ingrained in the company so that it can provide a clear picture of the value of good data versus bad data throughout that life cycle. So it becomes clear as you start to understand the different processes and controls put in place. But governance is more than just communicating the importance of quality, right? It's also communicating and building structured standards and policies that the entire organization respects and follows. So with all that said, creating a program focused on data governance is an additional work stream onto itself. It's its own project, which means time and money, right? But the benefits definitely outweigh the time and energy involved to make this come to life. Just to name a few, like I mentioned before, decreasing costs throughout the product lifecycle. An example of that is think about the reduced manual effort of cleansing bad data. I'm sure everyone that is in the market for a PIM has heard and is well aware of bad data and the time it takes to clean it up, usually towards the end of the life cycle. Another big one is compliance. So think about personal data security, think about clear traceability of data throughout the life cycle if an audit were to occur. These are just a few like simple examples, but there's many, many more. So why data governance? A lack of data governance can turn a super successful software implementation where you did everything right, but it can turn a software solution that's successful into a business solution that's unsuccessful. So like I said before, the first step in developing a plan around data governance is to focus on quality, the value of quality. If the organization understands that better quality equals more dollars, it shouldn't be hard to sell to anyone, right? And once the culture has adapted to the new norms, it's much easier to enforce and the money keeps rolling in, right? So data quality is a word I keep throwing around. Quality is a value I keep throwing around. Sounds like a buzzword, and it is a buzzword if you don't create a plan for what it means. And this, like I said before, sounds like it's an easy thing, but it's really not. It requires several different groups from different business units, from the technical side, to all come to the table and sacrifice time and energy to make it happen. But it's not all doom and gloom. As long as you have good leadership and the culture is willing to evolve and respect the importance of quality, the change is going to happen. And the change you'd ultimately like to see is those business teams, those stewards, empowered to be their own owners, their own data stewards, right? They're not having to be preached to anymore. They understand. So they own the quality of their data and they understand and follow the rules in place across the organization. So I just talked a lot about data governance, but what does this data governance thing actually look like in the real world? So I wanted to show another just real simple example of what a data governance program looks like. And in this example, I included two forms of a data governance council. Ideally, you would like separate teams because you'll have different levels of expertise and also different levels of influence. But I've also seen one council work effectively as well. You just need to decide on the structure that makes the most sense for your company. Now, as far as logistically, what's next? What do you do? The first step really is something that you should be doing really early on in the implementation, and that's identify those data stewards, right? Identify the owners of all the subsets of product data throughout the organization and build this thing out in an actual living document, which is called a data dictionary. If you don't know what that is, Google it. It really is. It's an enterprise-wide definition of data ownership and responsibilities. And this is a huge step with regards to the data model implementation, but it's also a tool that will evolve over time and lead to much greater efficiencies and just a better trust in the quality of the data. Because at the end of the day, that's what you want. You want people to come to this PIM solution and know that the data inside is good quality. So your next step is to decide which council form is most relevant, right? So from a high level, you need to have members of a council that consist of leaders from the different business units that make sense for your company, folks that directly or indirectly touch this product data. And at a high level, the council is responsible for prioritizing changes, directing business objectives. At a lower level, it's responsible for creating and enforcing those policies around value and efficiencies. So the policies should all be focused, again, on high quality data and making sure that the process is well known and well received across the organization. So the final area of PIM failure or potential PIM failure is change management. And in most cases, implementing a PIM solution requires changing quite a few processes, quite a few business processes, and day-to-day jobs are going to change. Some of them, may have been done in Excel or even by hand. But again, the reason you're in the market for a PIM is that the current processes do not scale to the size of the job at hand. It doesn't scale to the growth of the company that you want to have. So the shift to PIM should obviously mean greater efficiencies, greater collaboration across these different business teams. But that only works if the organization manages change well. And this is where this third area of failure comes into play, change management. So as I said around data governance, one of the primary goals of governance is to educate, empower, and really equip the organization, the wider organization, understand and play an active role in maximizing the value of product data. So in order to make that dream a reality, your company requires good change management. And good change management is simple on paper, harder to obviously enact. But here are some just things to keep in mind when you're starting to build out this change management program. First thing is change starts at the top and it begins day one. So the executive team that we talked about earlier really needs to drive home the importance of consistent communication from project kickoff all the way through to go live and beyond. So it's very easy for the project teams who are, in the weeds working on this solution to lose sight of the time and effort needed to communicate all the change that's coming. Which kind of segues into the next point, which is real change really happens at the bottom. And this basically means the project teams involved need to take ownership in the communication and only really utilize the executives when hitting roadblocks. And further down the line, empowering ownership at the user level is key. Like the data steward example from earlier, give the business users the ability and the confidence to make their own decisions, and they will. And the only way to really empower is to communicate to the point where you feel like you're over communicating. So too many times in my experience, I've taken for granted that people are understanding or even looking at some of my emails or presentations. So over communicate, over communicate, over communicate. And get the users involved early and often. Training and education is, obviously a requirement for a software implementation within your enterprise, but go the extra mile. Get the users involved in the process of actually building the tool. You'll not only educate them on what the tool can do and how it'll affect their day-to-day, but you'll get them excited about it, right? You'll get them excited about the change that's coming. And that's key in making sure that a go live is successful. Lastly, make those users feel heard. That's just another important aspect of change management, right? Like if you feel like you and your voice is heard, you yourself will go that extra mile to provide the input or assistance that the project teams need to make this solution work. So what do you do? What should you do once you are ready to build this program? So first of all, do it now. Build a plan early and make sure that it correlates with your implementation program as well. It should, like I said, be planned before the project even begins. I've already discussed how change management is vital for the data governance side of things, but its remit really falls under the entire PIM program, from user acceptance testing, end user training, just business adoption in general. So engage early, engage often, and stay consistent. And just like with data governance, the most effective PIM implementations I've seen included a dedicated team just focused on change management, or at least a dedicated resource, someone that's responsible solely for change management planning, and the actual execution. So the strategies around communication, just like with quality, can be measured, right? So one of the things that you don't want to take for granted, like I said before, is that what you've been communicating or training users on is actually being digested and understood. So one of the key strategies I've seen from a change management program that was effective is create metrics to measure change, right? So think about back in school, you were graded by homework and in exams based on your knowledge, right? Do the same thing here. Doing so will, obviously add additional work for the users and yourself, but it will give you comfort in knowing that when you do go live, the PIM is well understood and everyone in the organization that's involved with it understands how it affects their job. So when you do move into go live, you do get into production, things run smoothly, and the feedback loop for getting that system even better starts there. So let's recap the 3 areas covered today, all of which, like I said before, are typically glossed over, totally taken for granted when you start a project of this kind of software. Program management and the failures around that was the first thing I covered. I'd say if you remember anything from that section, it's to focus on road mapping a clear, achievable business goal with short phase deliverables. So, like I said, adding value to those goals, getting a system out there for the users to use, and starting that feedback loop is key. The second section, the second point of failure area that I covered was data governance. The people and processes behind the technology are just as important as the technology. And they need to be well thought out, planned. There needs to be a governance council of peers that understand the importance of quality in order to really utilize all the benefits of a PIM. And lastly, change management. That's really the glue that holds everything together. And like I said before, over-communicate, 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 early and often. All stakeholders are involved in it. And if you do so, you'll have a shot at a successful implementation. Okay. So that's it for this video. Again, my name is Michael Desmond. I am a client director at Amplify. We are one of WindShuttle's premier partners. Love implementing InnoWorks. And so, if you have any questions about our experience with InnoWorks implementations or just PIM implementations in general, would love to chat with you. Obviously cover these topics, but anything you want to talk about, please feel free to reach out to us, goamplify.com. Thanks, everybody.